From her silent penthouse suite overlooking the glittering expanse of Seattle, she could manipulate markets with a single command and shift the fates of 1,000 worlds. To her Cathar kin, she was Zilia Valerius, CEO of Celestial Dynamics, a being of pure logic tasked with evaluating Earth for corporate assimilation. But here, on this primitive, chaotic planet, she was Zara Vance, a ghost in the system. Her target wasn't a rival corporation or a government. It was one man, Ethan Carter, a low-level data technician, an anomaly in her projections, a single father working himself to the bone. She expected to find inefficiency, emotional weakness, and proof that humanity was a resource to be managed, not a partner to be valued. What she found, hiding in the shadows of his life, would shatter her logic and challenge the foundation of her entire civilization. The air in the Ether Logistics server farm hummed with the sound of 1,000,000 digital whispers. It was a controlled, sterile environment, much like the one Zilia preferred in her true form. As Zara Vance, the new, impossibly sharp senior vice president of interdepartmental efficiency, she moved through the aisles of blinking servers with a predatory grace. Her human disguise was flawless. A tailored charcoal suit, raven hair pulled into a severe bun, and eyes the color of a winter storm. They were eyes that missed nothing. Her focus for the past 3 rotations, or as humans called them, weeks, had been on a single data point. Employee 734, Ethan Carter. According to every metric the Cathar valued, Ethan was a failure. His efficiency logs showed periodic dips in performance, often between 02 cores and 04 local time. His biosignature, monitored through the building's subtle atmospheric sensors, indicated elevated cortisol and chronic sleep deprivation. He consistently clocked out precisely on time, never staying a minute extra for the corporate good, yet he also never missed a shift. He was a paradox of mediocrity and reliability. From her discreet observation post, a security camera feed routed to her private datapad, she watched him now. He was lean, with weary lines etched around his eyes that shouldn't belong on a man his age. His brown hair was perpetually a little messy, and his shoulders had a permanent slump, as if carrying an invisible weight. He was currently rerouting a corrupted data packet, his fingers moving across the holographic interface with a familiar, practiced ease. Suddenly, a younger technician, a nervous kid named Ben, rushed over. "Ethan, man, I'm sorry. I think I cross-wired the archival feed for the new client, Omnicorp. It's all garbled." Zilia watched, her analytical mind processing the interaction. A superior Cathar would reprimand the subordinate, document the error, and assign a demerit. It was the logical, efficient course of action. Ethan Carter just sighed, a sound heavy with a fatigue that went bone deep. He glanced at the clock. "It's all right, Ben. We've got 40 minutes. Let's take a look. Show me the command string you used." For the next half hour, Ethan patiently walked the younger man through the error, not just fixing it, but explaining the why behind the protocol. He didn't just correct the mistake, he taught. It was inefficient. It wasted the time of a more experienced technician on a task that could have been solved alone in a third of the time. Yet, when they finished, Ben looked relieved, and, more importantly, more confident. "I owe you big time, Ethan," Ben said. Ethan clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of physical reassurance Zilia's species found bizarrely intimate. "Don't worry about it. Just buy me a coffee tomorrow. A strong one." He offered a tired smile, and Zilia noted the way it momentarily erased the exhaustion from his face. This was the anomaly. His actions were illogical. He gained no status, no bonus, no tangible benefit from helping his subordinate in such a time-consuming manner. He was cultivating a resource. Yes, but on a micro level that was statistically insignificant to the company's bottom line. Her initial assessment was that he was fostering dependencies to ensure his own job security, a common, if primitive, tactic. The end-of-shift chime rang through the facility. Ethan methodically logged out of his station, packed a worn messenger bag, and headed for the exit. Zelia watched him go, her brow furrowed in a very human expression of puzzlement. Her algorithm had predicted a 92.7% probability that he would report Ben's error to secure a minor advantage in the upcoming performance reviews. He had defied the prediction. Her mission was simple: confirm that humanity's emotional, illogical nature made them unsuitable for a true partnership with the Cathar conglomerate. The data from Ether Logistics was meant to be the final proof. The company was rife with petty rivalries, inefficient emotional outbursts, and a general lack of focus on the collective goal. Ethan Carter was supposed to be a prime example. Yet he continued to deviate. Dismissing her private transport, she slipped out a side door and into the cool Seattle night. A cloaking field shimmered around her, rendering her invisible to the human eye. She needed more data. The office environment was too controlled. To understand the anomaly, she had to observe it in its native habitat. She followed him, a silent predator, stalking her prey through the concrete canyons. He didn't go to a sleek, modern apartment complex. He took a series of public transport buses, each one more crowded and less clean than the last, until he was in a neighborhood called Ballard. It was an older, working-class area, with small houses and the lingering smell of salt water in the air. He stopped in front of a small, aging duplex with a poorly lit porch. Before he went inside, he paused, took a deep breath, and straightened his slumped shoulders. The man who walked through the door was not just the tired technician from Ether Logistics. He was someone else, someone preparing for a different role. Zelia deactivated her cloak, melting into the shadows of a large maple tree across the street. The light in a small, ground-floor window flickered on. The numbers on her datapad told a story of financial hardship and dwindling resources. But the numbers didn't explain the transformation she had just witnessed. They didn't explain the teaching, the patience, the smile. The numbers were no longer enough. She had to get closer. Zelia's surveillance of Ethan Carter's finances revealed the reason for his precise clocking out. He wasn't going home to rest. He was going to another job. A scan of local employment records, cross-referenced with his tax identification, led her to a place that offended her Cathar sensibilities on a molecular level. The Blue Plate Diner. It was a relic of a bygone human era, a long, narrow building of stainless steel and faded red vinyl. The air inside was thick with the smell of frying grease, burnt coffee, and a complex symphony of human chatter. It was loud, chaotic, and profoundly inefficient. She took a seat in a booth at the back, pulling the collar of her jacket up. Her human disguise was different tonight, less corporate, more casual, designed to blend in. Faded jeans, a simple grey hoodie. Still, she felt as conspicuous as a supernova in a dark nebula. And there he was, Ethan Carter, dressed in a white apron, stained with grease, and a paper hat perched slightly askew on his head. He moved behind the counter with a speed and economy of motion that was entirely absent from his work at the server farm. Here, he wasn't a technician. He was a machine. 2 eggs, over easy, bacon crisp, hash browns scattered and smothered. A waitress named Flo, a woman with a voice like gravel and a cloud of white hair, barked at him. "Heard!" Ethan called back, his voice cutting through the din. He cracked 4 eggs onto the massive griddle with one hand, laid out strips of bacon with the other, and scooped a mound of potatoes onto the hot surface, all in a single, fluid sequence. His hands, which so carefully navigated holographic data streams by day, were now a blur of flipping, turning, and plating. Zilia watched, fascinated. This was not the tired, methodical man from Ether Logistics. This was a man running on pure adrenaline. He coordinated a dozen orders simultaneously, his eyes scanning the ticket rail, his body responding with an instinctual choreography. He communicated with Flo and the other staff in a clipped, coded language of diner slang. "Adam and Eve on a raft, wreck 'em! Burn one, take it through the garden!" For 2 hours, Zilia sat, nursing a cup of bitter coffee, her internal sensors analyzing the scene. The diner was a microcosm of chaotic human interaction. Arguments over sports teams, laughter that was too loud, a young couple breaking up in a nearby booth, a group of truck drivers from a company called Swift Transportation telling crude jokes. It was a storm of unfiltered emotion and sensory overload. And Ethan was at the center of it, the calm eye of the hurricane. He was not just cooking. He was managing the chaos. He broke up a potential fight between two patrons with a quiet word and a free slice of pie. He slipped an extra pancake onto the plate of a little girl who was watching him with wide eyes. When Flo's back was clearly aching, he took over her station for 10 minutes, running food to tables without missing a beat on the grill. Again, the illogical altruism. These actions did not increase his pay. They did not improve his station. In fact, they expended precious energy he clearly did not have. Her datapad flagged his biometrics. His heart rate was dangerously elevated, his body running on a cocktail of caffeine and sheer willpower. He was, by all Cathar metrics, destroying himself. For what? A meager second income and the approval of his temporary co-workers. It made no sense. Around 11:04 p.m., a young woman with pink hair and a worn-out backpack came in and sat at the counter. She looked exhausted and near tears. Ethan paused his frantic work, leaned over the counter, and spoke to her in a low voice. Zilia enhanced the audio feed from her earring sensor. "Rough one, Maya?" he asked. The girl nodded, not looking up. "Got fired. Rent's due Friday." Ethan looked at the ticket rail, then back at her. He quickly plated a burger and fries. This one was an extra. Kitchen mistake. On the house. Maya looked up, her eyes wide. "Ethan, I can't—" "Eat," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We'll figure the other stuff out later. I might know a guy looking for help with inventory down at the docks." He then turned back to the grill as if nothing had happened. Zilia felt a strange sensation in her chest, a processing error her human disguise interpreted as a tightening. She ran a diagnostic. It was not a malfunction. It was empathy, a foreign, unwelcome data packet. She was witnessing a system of support based on unwritten rules and unspoken agreements, a network of mutual, inefficient compassion. Ethan was not just working here. He was part of a tribe, a small, struggling community that survived by propping each other up. She left the diner and returned to the shadows across from his duplex. Her mind, usually a pristine landscape of logic and probabilities, was now cluttered with contradictory data. The man in the server farm was a passable employee. The man in the diner was a force of nature. They were the same person, yet they were entirely different. The front door of the duplex opened an hour later. Ethan practically staggered up the walk, his movements slow and heavy. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a profound exhaustion that was painful to watch. He fumbled with his keys, dropped them, and bent down with a groan to pick them up. He was pushing his biological limits to their absolute breaking point. The question that now consumed Zilia, the question that overrode every line of her original mission directive, was no longer how he did it. It was why. The answer, she knew, was inside that house. Gaining access to the Carter residence was trivial. Cathar technology could bypass a simple human deadbolt as easily as a human could step over a crack in the sidewalk. She phased the lock's internal tumblers out of alignment for a microsecond, and the door clicked open. She slipped inside, silent as a whisper, her personal cloaking field making her a ghost in the small, cluttered living room. The house was clean, but worn. The sofa had a faded floral pattern and a distinct dip on one side. The bookshelf was overflowing with well-read paperbacks and a collection of what looked like children's books. A half-finished puzzle of a star-filled galaxy lay on the coffee table. The air smelled of lavender and disinfectant. A soft, rhythmic beeping sound led her down a short hallway to a partially open door. Peeking inside, Zilia's analytical mind ground to a halt. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight, shaped like a crescent moon. In a small bed lay a little girl, no older than 7 or 8 human years. Her pale blonde hair fanned out on the pillow around a face that was delicate and frail. A clear tube ran from her nose to a softly humming machine beside the bed. This was the source of the beeping, a medical monitor displaying her oxygen saturation and heart rate. This was Lily. Ethan was sitting on the edge of the bed. He had changed out of his greasy work clothes into a soft, worn t-shirt. The crushing exhaustion was still on his face, but it was softened by an expression of such profound tenderness that Zilia felt that processing error in her chest again, stronger this time. "Read me the one about the Star Sailor," the little girl whispered, her voice thin but clear. Ethan picked up a book from the nightstand. The cover showed a cartoon boy in a spaceship made of cardboard. "All right, Sweet Pea." Captain Leo adjusted his helmet, which was really his mum's colander, and prepared for launch. His voice, which was clipped and professional at the diner and flat with fatigue at the office, was now a low, gentle murmur. He read the story with feeling, making different voices for the characters, even adding sound effects for the spaceship. Lily's eyes, heavy with sleep, were fixed on his face, a small smile playing on her lips. Zilia stood in the doorway, a silent, invisible god in this tiny, sacred space, and watched. She cross-referenced the medical equipment with her database. The machine was a specialized nocturnal oxygen concentrator and air purifier. The diagnosis associated with it was severe, chronic. Cystic fibrosis, a genetic disorder. Expensive, incurable by human medicine. It all clicked into place, the disparate data points locking together to form a terrifyingly clear picture. The double shifts, the exhaustion, the fierce focus at the diner, where every tip counted. The meticulous, patient work at Ether Logistics to maintain the stable job, the one that came with the all-important health insurance provided by a subsidiary of a company called Cigna. This wasn't about ambition or job security in the abstract. It was about this little girl. Every calorie he burned, every hour of sleep he sacrificed, was converted directly into another breath for his daughter. His life was not his own. It was fuel for hers. When the story was over, Lily was asleep. Ethan gently brushed the hair from her forehead, his rough, calloused fingers, impossibly gentle. He checked the monitor, adjusted her blanket, and leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Sleep tight, my star sailor," he whispered. He stood up and walked out of the room, softly closing the door behind him. Zilia remained, her gaze fixed on the sleeping child. The Cathar had no direct equivalent to this. Offspring were raised in communal creches, cared for by designated custodians. The bond was one of societal duty, not this fierce, all-consuming thing. She had always defined love as a biochemical illusion, a primitive impulse designed to ensure species propagation. It was inefficient, causing jealousy, irrationality, and distraction. It was a weakness to be exploited. But what she was witnessing was not weakness. This was a source of power. It was an engine fueled by devotion that allowed a simple, exhausted man to perform superhuman feats of endurance. He was tearing himself apart, not out of weakness, but as a deliberate act of strength. She followed Ethan to the kitchen. He wasn't going to bed. He was sitting at the small table with a stack of papers, medical bills, insurance forms. He held his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook with a silent, racking sob. It lasted only a moment. He then scrubbed his face with his hands, took a shaky breath, and picked up a pen. The warrior was back, fighting a different kind of battle, this one waged with ink and numbers. Zelia slipped out of the house, the night air feeling cold against her human skin. Her entire understanding of this species had been predicated on a flawed axiom. She had been evaluating their performance without understanding their motivation. It was like trying to understand a star by analyzing a single, isolated photon. You could know its properties, but you would never comprehend the staggering thermonuclear furnace from which it was born. Ethan Carter's motivation wasn't profit or status. It was the little girl sleeping under a moon-shaped nightlight, and that motivation made him more resilient, more determined, and more dangerous than any of her data could have ever predicted. Her mission was no longer about observing a subject. It was about understanding a force of nature she had never known existed. The next morning, Zelia was Zara Vance again, the Ice Queen of celestial dynamics. But the ice felt thinner today, more brittle. She sat in a holographic conference room, the forms of 3 other Cathar executives shimmering around the obsidian table. One of them was Kalen, her chief rival. His face was all sharp angles and condescension, even in its holographic form. "Report, Valerius," Kalen's synthesized voice stated, devoid of warmth. "Your analysis of the target acquisition, ether logistics, is overdue. Our projections indicate a 40% reduction in workforce and a 20% cut in ancillary benefits would optimize profitability by the next fiscal cycle." Zelia looked at the data flowing across her vision. Kalen was right. The numbers were cold, hard, and logical, firing the bottom 40% of performers and slashing the ancillary benefits, which included the comprehensive health insurance plan, was the most efficient way to absorb the human company. Before her surveillance of Ethan, she would have agreed without hesitation. Now, she saw faces in the numbers. She saw Ben, the nervous young technician. She saw Flo, the aging waitress who depended on tips. And she saw Ethan Carter, sitting at his kitchen table, fighting a war with insurance forms. Slashing those benefits wouldn't just be a line item on a budget. It would be a death sentence for his daughter. "The initial data is incomplete," Zelia said, her voice carefully neutral. "I have uncovered motivational paradigms that are not accounted for in our standard assessment models. Human resilience appears to be directly correlated with external emotional stresses in a way that defies our predictions of systemic collapse." Kalen scoffed, a dry, rasping sound. "Emotional stressors? You mean weakness? Valerius, your predecessor, was removed for over-immersion. Do not make the same mistake. They are primitives, emotional, chaotic. We are to streamline them, not psychoanalyze them. The board requires your final recommendation. Implement the cuts, or I will." The threat was clear. Kalen wanted her command, her prestige. He would use any perceived weakness against her. "The recommendation will be delivered on schedule," she said, her voice turning to ice. "Do not presume to rush my analysis." She ended the transmission, leaving herself alone in the silent room. She was trapped. Her duty to the Cathar conglomerate demanded she follow the path of pure logic and efficiency. But the new data, the data she couldn't quantify, the data of a father's love, cried out that the logical path was wrong. It was a monstrous, blind calculus that failed to account for the most crucial variable. She pulled up the Ether Logistics employee roster, tagged for termination under Kaelin's plan. Ben's name was on it, and so was Ethan Carter's. His performance dips, while Minor had placed him just below the cutoff line. He was considered redundant, expendable. The irony was crushing. The very system she was here to impose was the threat that had been looming over Ethan's head all along. She, Zara Vance, was the faceless corporate monster he was fighting in the dead of night. His struggle wasn't just against a disease, it was against her. She initiated a priority directive, a subtle manipulation of the company's server protocols. She accessed Ethan Carter's work logs, intending to find a way to justify keeping him, to fudge the numbers. What she found surprised her. Hidden beneath his standard duties were dozens of custom-written diagnostic scripts and efficiency macros. They were elegant, brilliantly simple, and had automated dozens of minor tasks, saving the company thousands of man-hours over the past year. He had never taken credit for them. He had simply written them and embedded them into the system for everyone to use. When she cross-referenced the creation timestamps, they corresponded with his late-night performance dips. He wasn't slacking off. He was doing unassigned, unpaid work to make the entire system run better. Work that, because it wasn't officially sanctioned, wasn't counted in his performance metrics. He was improving the collective at his own expense. It was the Cathar ideal, performed by a primitive human for no personal gain. A new alert pinged on her datapad. It was from the Ether Logistics HR department. A formal warning had been issued to Ethan Carter. Subject: unapproved system modifications and decreased core duty efficiency. Someone had discovered his scripts, and instead of rewarding him, they were punishing him for it. His attempt to help the system was now being used as justification for his termination. And his termination would mean the loss of Lily's insurance. Zilia felt a surge of cold fury, an emotion she hadn't experienced in centuries. It was potent, clarifying. Kaelin and his blind adherence to flawed metrics were about to destroy one of the most valuable assets this company had. Her decision was made. The Cathar way was to observe, to analyze from a distance, and to act with overwhelming, impersonal force. But that way was flawed. It was blind. To save the asset, to prove her new theory, she would have to break the most sacred Cathar rule of all. She would have to interfere. The formal warning hit Ethan like a physical blow. He sat in his cubicle, staring at the message on his screen, the words blurring together. Unapproved modifications. Deviation from standard protocol. Subject to immediate termination upon further infraction. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This job, this soul-crushing, monotonous job, was the only thing standing between Lily and catastrophe. The insurance plan was a premium one, fought for by the employee union years ago. It was one of the few that covered the experimental treatments that kept Lily's lung function stable. Losing it wasn't an option. The scripts he'd written, he'd only been trying to help, to streamline the repetitive, time-wasting tasks so he could focus on the real problems. He never thought it would be seen as a negative. The pressure, which had been a constant, crushing weight, now felt like it was actively trying to pulverize him. That night at the diner, his hands shook. He burned an order of bacon and sent out a burger with pickles when the ticket explicitly said, "No pickles." "Carter, get your head in the game," Flo snapped, though her eyes held more concern than anger. "Sorry," he mumbled. his mind a million miles away, calculating deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums. When he got home, the house was too quiet. The rhythmic beep of Lily's monitor was gone. He froze in the doorway, his heart seizing in his chest, before he saw the note on the table from Mrs. Gable, his elderly neighbor who watched Lily in the evenings. "Ethan, the machine started making a funny noise. I called the service number and they said to shut it down. Lily seems okay, just a little cough." I sat with her until she fell asleep. "Marge!" He ran to Lily's room. She was asleep, but her breathing was shallow, a faint wheeze whistling in her chest with every breath. Her oxygen saturation monitor, a small clip on her finger, read 88%. Dangerously low. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his exhaustion. He called the 24/7 medical supply company. The conversation was a nightmare of corporate doublespeak. "Yes, Mr. Carter, we see the fault report. The unit's primary compressor has failed." "When can you get a new one here?" he asked, his voice tight. "Well, sir, that unit is a top-of-the-line model from a company called Medtronic. Due to supply chain issues, the replacement part is back-ordered. We can have a technician there in 3 to 5 business days." 3 to 5 days? She can't wait that long. "Don't you have a loaner unit?" "I can put you on the waiting list for a standard model, but it lacks the microfiltration system your daughter's prescription requires. Also, your Cigna insurance plan requires pre-authorization for rental equipment, which can take 48 hours to process." The voice on the other end of the phone droned on, a meaningless recitation of rules and regulations that felt like a wall being built around him, brick by brick. He hung up, his hand trembling. He was trapped. The system designed to help was strangling him with red tape. From across the street, cloaked in the darkness, Zelia monitored the entire exchange. Her sensors picked up the audio from his phone call, the elevated carbon dioxide levels in Lily's room, the girl's dangerously low blood oxygen. She watched as Ethan slumped against the wall, the fight finally seeming to drain out of him. He looked utterly broken. A man pushed past his limits, abandoned by the very structures he worked so hard to uphold. This was the breaking point. According to Kalen's logic, this was where the human would fail. He would collapse into emotional despair, rendering him useless. The system would win. But then Zelia watched as Ethan pushed himself off the wall. He walked back into Lily's room and gently lifted his sleeping daughter into his arms, wrapping her in a thick blanket. He grabbed her emergency inhaler, his worn messenger bag, and his keys. He was not giving up. He was going to the one place left to go, the emergency room at Seattle Children's Hospital. As he carried his daughter out to his rusty, decade-old Ford Focus, his face was a mask of grim determination. The despair was gone, burned away by the fierce, primal fire of a father's protective instinct. He was not beaten. He was at war. Zelia's internal processors whirred. Kalen was wrong. Her own civilization was wrong. This wasn't a weakness. This was the moment of transformation. The moment a simple man, pushed to the brink, became something more. This was the variable her people had never once considered, that when stripped of all logical options, humanity's true strength was revealed. And she realized her interference could no longer be subtle. The scripts and the performance reviews were meaningless now. A life was on the line. Her observation was over. It was time for action. The emergency room at Seattle Children's was organized chaos. Crying children, worried parents, and the harried, calm voices of nurses and doctors filled the air. Ethan had been there for 3 hours. Lily was now in a treatment room, hooked up to a hospital-grade machine that stabilized her breathing, but the doctor had been blunt. "Her lungs are showing signs of increased inflammation," Dr. Aris Thorne explained. his face kind but weary. The portable unit she has is crucial. Without that specific level of air purity at home, especially during sleep, she'll keep ending up back here, and each time the damage could be worse. We need to keep her here for observation until her home unit is fixed. Ethan nodded, numb. An overnight stay meant more bills, more time off work he couldn't afford. He felt like he was drowning. Meanwhile, Zilia was moving. She had abandoned her human disguise and the pretense of non-interference. From her penthouse, which now felt more like a command center, she unleashed the full, terrifying power of Cathar technology. To any outside observer, it would look like a series of fortunate coincidences. To her, it was a surgical strike against a broken system. Her first target was the medical supply company. She didn't hack their system. She became their system. She wove her consciousness into their digital infrastructure. Within seconds, she located the back-ordered compressor part. It wasn't back-ordered at all. It was sitting in a warehouse in Tacoma, mislabeled in the inventory due to a human data entry error. She corrected the error, flagged the part for emergency philanthropic priority, assigned it to the nearest on-call courier from a service like FedEx, and fabricated a CEO-level directive to have it delivered and installed within the next 2 hours, all costs covered by a newly created executive discretionary fund. The fund itself was seeded with a microtransaction, pulling an untraceable 0.01% from several of Kalen's offshore slush fund accounts. Her second target was Ether Logistics. She dove into their HR server. She didn't just delete Ethan's warning, she rewrote history. She unearthed the uncredited efficiency scripts he had written, compiled them, and ran a full diagnostic projection. The results were staggering. His unapproved modifications had saved the company an estimated 1.2 million zloty in the last fiscal year by preventing systemic failures and reducing diagnostic man-hours. She packaged this data into a formal report, attributed it to a phantom internal audit, and sent it directly to the inbox of the company's human CEO, a man named Robert Maxwell. The report recommended not a reprimand, but the creation of a new position, Senior Systems Analyst and Process Innovator, with a significant pay raise and a commendation for proactive problem-solving. The prime candidate suggested was Ethan Carter. Her final and most personal intervention was at the hospital. While Lily was stable, Zilia's scans showed the underlying genetic markers of her disease with a clarity human science couldn't match. Within her own database was Cathar medical knowledge, centuries ahead of Earth's. While she couldn't deploy a nanite cure without revealing herself, she could provide a stepping stone. She synthesized a complex research paper detailing a novel gene therapy approach, a treatment that could halt the progression of the disease. The paper was filled with complex molecular diagrams and theoretical data that would be groundbreaking. She embedded the file deep within the hospital's research server, disguised as a corrupted data packet from a long-defunct research project in Germany. Then, she created a digital breadcrumb, a cross-indexing error that a curious researcher was bound to stumble upon within a few weeks. She tagged it to the profile of a brilliant but underfunded geneticist who worked at the hospital, Dr. Lena Hansen. She wasn't giving them the cure, but she was giving them the map. Back in the hospital waiting room, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was an automated message from the medical supply company. Your replacement part has been dispatched. Estimated arrival at your residence, 90 minutes. An installation technician is en route. Ethan stared at the phone, bewildered. It had to be a mistake. A moment later, it buzzed again. An email, this time from Ether Logistics HR. The subject line read, Urgent, Job Reclassification and Promotion. He opened it. his eyes scanning the words in disbelief. Commendation, invaluable asset, significant salary increase, effective immediately. He felt a wave of dizziness. None of this made sense. It was impossible. It felt like some unseen hand had reached down from the heavens and rewritten his entire life in the span of 10 minutes. He looked over at Lily, sleeping peacefully in the hospital bed, her breathing steady. The exhaustion, the despair, the suffocating weight of it all began to recede, replaced by a fragile, burgeoning hope he hadn't felt in years. High above the city, Zelia Valerius leaned back in her chair. Her personal datapad chimed. It was Kaelin. She accepted the connection. "Valerius!" he snapped, his image flickering with anger. "There are anomalies in my financial accounts, and Ether Logistics just approved a promotion for a redundant employee in direct violation of my optimization protocol. What are you doing?" Zelia looked out at the city lights, at the single blinking light of the hospital, where a father was reading a promotion letter he didn't understand. "I am correcting your flawed data, Kaelin," she said, her voice calm and imbued with an authority he had never heard from her before. "I am demonstrating the gross inefficiency of your logic. You tried to discard a diamond because you were too blind to see it wasn't a rock. My final report is being filed now. It will recommend a full partnership with this species, not an acquisition. And it will name you as an obstacle to progress." She cut the connection, leaving him sputtering in holographic silence. Her choice was made. She hadn't just interfered. She had declared war on the cold, sterile philosophy of her own people. She had chosen the chaotic, inefficient, illogical, and utterly magnificent resilience of humanity. A month later, the world had shifted on its axis for Ethan Carter. He walked through the doors of Ether Logistics not as a weary technician, but as the new head of the Process Innovation Department. His new salary was more than double his old one, enough to quit the diner and hire a proper in-home nurse for Lily. The new medical unit, installed by a mysteriously efficient crew that night, worked perfectly. Lily's health had improved dramatically with the consistent, high-quality air. He still didn't understand what had happened. He called it the Miracle Monday. One moment he was at rock bottom, the next he was flying. He chalked it up to a series of bureaucratic lucky breaks, a cosmic alignment of good fortune he felt he had in no way earned, but was profoundly grateful for. Today, he was scheduled to meet the executive who had apparently championed his promotion, the enigmatic Zara Vance. He'd only ever seen her from a distance, a sharp, intimidating figure who moved with an unnerving confidence. He knocked on her office door. "Come in," a calm voice answered. The office was minimalist and immaculate, with a single panoramic window overlooking the city. Zara Vance stood by the window, her back to him. She turned, and for a second, Ethan felt an odd sense of recognition, though he was sure they had never met. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice smoother than he expected. "Please have a seat." "Miss Vance," he began, feeling awkward and out of place. I don't know what to say. Thank you for this opportunity. I still don't fully understand why." "Your work speaks for itself," she interrupted softly. "Your diagnostic scripts were not just clever. They showed a fundamental understanding of the system's weaknesses. You saw the whole, not just your small part. That is a rare quality." He just nodded, unsure what to say. "I've been reviewing your file," she continued, her gaze intense. "You have a daughter, Lily." Ethan tensed. "Yes." "Her health is improving, I trust?" The question was so personal, so direct, that it caught him off guard. "It is," he said slowly. We had a scare about a month ago, but things are better now. Good. Zara looked away, back toward the window. Mr. Carter, Celestial Dynamics is restructuring its approach to our Earth-based assets. We're moving away from a model of pure profit optimization and toward a model of symbiotic growth. We're investing in our people. We're expanding the healthcare plan, not cutting it. We're establishing a child care and dependent care grant program. Ethan stared at her, dumbfounded. This was the opposite of every corporate horror story he'd ever heard. Why? He asked, the words slipping out before he could stop it. Zara Vance turned back to him. The cold, analytical mask she usually wore seemed to soften for just a fraction of a second, and in her stormy eyes he saw a flicker of something ancient and weary, but also new. It looked almost like respect. Because we ran the numbers again, she said, and we realized our initial calculations were missing the most important variable. We were measuring efficiency in terms of output per hour. We weren't measuring strength in terms of motivation. We've learned that a happy, secure, and motivated employee is not an ancillary benefit. They are the single most valuable asset in the known universe. She extended a hand. Welcome to the team, Ethan. I expect great things from you. He shook her hand, her grip firm and cool. As he left her office, the sense of unreality still clung to him, but it was now overlaid with a profound sense of purpose. Zelia watched him go. Her report to the Cathar conglomerate had sent shockwaves through their society. Backed by irrefutable data on the power of human resilience, with Ethan's story as the centerpiece, she had successfully argued that humanity's emotional nature was not a bug, but a feature. It was a source of strength so profound it could be weaponized or partnered with to achieve things pure logic never could. Kaelin had been censured and reassigned. A new era had begun. She was still an alien, a CEO, a being from another world. But as she watched Ethan walk back to his desk, a man no longer bent by the weight of the world, she felt something her people had long forgotten. It wasn't the cold satisfaction of a successful business deal. It was a quiet, resonant warmth. It was hope. Humanity, in all its chaotic, illogical, heartbreaking glory, had not just changed her mission. It had changed everything. And for the first time in 1,000 years, Zelia Valerius was excited about the future. 3 months passed, flowing like a tranquil river after a storm. The new paradigm Zelia had initiated at Celestial Dynamics Earth Division was proving more successful than even her most optimistic projections. Productivity at Ether Logistics was up 30%. Employee attrition had plummeted to near zero. And Ethan Carter was the brilliant, beating heart of that success. Freed from the crushing weight of financial and emotional desperation, his mind was a fountain of innovation. He led his new team with the same quiet patience he'd once used to teach Ben, fostering a collaborative environment that churned out elegant solutions to decade-old logistical problems. He left work at a reasonable hour, his shoulders no longer slumped. He spent his evenings not over a greasy griddle, but in his small backyard, pushing a laughing, vibrant Lily on a newly installed swing set. Her cough was almost gone, her energy boundless. Dr. Lena Hansen at Seattle Children's had, by sheer luck, stumbled upon some groundbreaking research that had allowed them to tailor a new, astonishingly effective treatment for her. To Ethan, life felt like a dream he was terrified of waking from. His relationship with Zara Vance remained one of respectful distance. He saw her as a figure of immense, almost intimidating authority who had inexplicably taken an interest in his career. He would send her his weekly progress reports, and she would reply with concise, encouraging feedback. Their brief meetings were always formal, professional, and left him with the distinct feeling that her mind was operating on a level he couldn't begin to comprehend. For Zilia, this period was one of quiet, satisfying observation. She was proving her thesis. A supported humanity was an ascendant humanity. She watched Ethan's progress, not as a scientist studying a lab subject, but as a gardener tending to a rare and precious plant. The strange processing error she once identified as empathy had stabilized into a consistent, low-level warmth she now recognized as satisfaction. The tranquility shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. A priority alert, one that bypassed all of celestial dynamics' conventional channels, pulsed from a quantum-entangled comms device hidden in her desk. It was a Cathar channel, reserved for High Command. But the signature was wrong. It was cloaked, routed through a dozen dead systems, and carried the digital ghost of a disgraced officer, Kalen. Her blood ran cold. She sealed her office, soundproofing the walls and polarizing the glass with a thought. She opened the data packet. It was not a message. It was a mirror, a perfect, real-time reflection of her own secret monitoring feed of Ethan Carter. She was watching herself, watching him. The video feed was from that morning, Ethan dropping Lily off at school, giving her a hug before she ran to join her friends. Then, the feed distorted, and a single line of Cathar text burned itself onto the screen. Anomalies must be corrected. The variable will be erased. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of intent. Kalen wasn't going to attack her through corporate channels. He was going to attack her thesis by destroying her prime example. He was going to prove that her sentiment was a fatal weakness by ripping her most valuable asset out of the equation. Panic, an emotion she had only ever observed, seized her with icy claws. She forced it down, her logic reasserting itself. Kalen couldn't make a direct move without exposing himself. He would use the system just as she had. He would be a ghost in the machine, but his purpose would be chaos, not creation. Immediately, she dove into the interconnected networks that governed Ethan's life. The first echo was in the medical supply company's mainframe. A new work order was pending, scheduled for the next day, a routine diagnostic on the Carter's atmospheric purifier. The technician assigned was a new hire, a man whose records were a little too perfect, his digital footprint practically non-existent. A saboteur. The second echo was darker. She found it buried deep in the city's financial networks. A series of encrypted, untraceable transactions had been made, funneling money into the dormant accounts of a known associate of Ethan's late wife's estranged family. The transfers were disguised to look like they came from Ethan's new, inflated salary, making it appear as if he were paying off criminal elements or hiding assets. It was a perfectly crafted seed of a corporate scandal. Kalen was dismantling the Miracle Monday, piece by piece. He would break the machine that kept Lily healthy and simultaneously frame Ethan, ruining his career and reputation. He would return Ethan to that state of desperation, and then, Zilia knew, with chilling certainty, he would offer Ethan a devil's bargain, a way out in exchange for betraying Zara Vance, all to prove to the Cathar board that a human, when pressured, would always revert to selfish, chaotic survival instincts. Zilia's hands clenched into fists. The cold fury she'd felt once before returned, now honed to a razor's edge. This was no longer a corporate debate. Kalen had made it personal. He had threatened the child. Her previous interventions had been as a distant, invisible god. She now understood that was no longer an option. A ghost cannot protect a house from a saboteur in the walls. To protect Ethan and Lily, she had to get closer. She had to become a physical presence in their lives, a shield. But how? She was his boss, an aloof executive. There was no logical pretext. She wrestled with the problem for a full hour, her mind racing through probabilities and social scenarios. Finally, she landed on a plan. It was risky, illogical, and would break a dozen more of her own rules of non-interference. It was, she realized with a start, a very human solution. That evening, Ethan was helping Lily with her homework at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang. He was not expecting anyone. He opened the door to find Zara Vance standing on his porch. She was not dressed in her severe corporate armor. She wore simple black slacks and a soft, dark blue sweater. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders. She looked younger, less intimidating, and profoundly out of place. In her hands, she held a file folder. "Miss Vance?" Ethan asked, utterly shocked. "Mr. Carter." "Ethan," she corrected herself, her voice even. "Forgive the intrusion. A sensitive security matter has arisen concerning a high-value asset. I'm afraid that asset is you." So, what happens when a being of pure logic, who sees emotion as nothing more than a flaw in the code, comes face to face with the limitless power of a father's love? The story of Zelia and Ethan shows us that the greatest strengths are often hidden in the places we're taught to see as weaknesses. It's a reminder that behind every data point, every employee number, there's a human story of struggle, sacrifice, and incredible resilience. Zelia came to Earth seeking to exploit a primitive species, but she found a power that humbled her entire civilization and changed the course of the galaxy. What did you think of Zelia's final choice? Was it an act of logic, or did she finally succumb to the very human emotions she was studying? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into what makes us truly human, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story, and be sure to subscribe for more tales of humanity's hidden strengths. Your support helps bring these stories to life. Thanks for listening.